This is Christine. Christine is the oldest example of the work of one of the most incredible luthiers and guitar painters that has ever lived. His name is Tom Murphy. This is the second burst that Tom Murphy ever painted. The first one is lost to history. It was sold and is out there in the ether somewhere. So this is actually the oldest existing copy of a Tom Murphy. Now, the interesting thing about this guitar is not only did it open the door or kind of start a pathway for Tom into his career, but more than that, it's an example of how his ideas had already coalesced and he was already good by the second guitar he'd ever painted. Because this example is just a stunning, stunning guitar, which when you see the work that he did on this guitar as his second ever effort, it wasn't like he was trying to get there. Tom was already there. As he said to me, I painted that guitar before I was Tom Murphy. Well, when you see the work he did, you can tell he was already Tom Murphy. But that's not the story of this guitar. Yeah, it's painted by one of the most incredible and famous, painters on earth, but that's not the story of this guitar. The story of this guitar is one of friendship and one of, of doing something for a brother when, their chips were down, and the culmination of a 40-year friendship and relationship. And how I came to possess this guitar is through that friendship. And that's truly the story of this guitar. And stick with us. It's a bit of a longer episode than we normally do, but I think you'll enjoy it. Anyway, this is the Journeyman Guitarist, John Wesley. We're going to jump into the next part of the episode now. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things. Part 2 coming up. Okay, part 2 of the interview. I had to have some help. We're going to get to the big reveal, and we're going to do the big reveal right now. But to do the big reveal, I needed to bring in the gentleman that put his hands on the pieces that became this guitar and put it all together with a lot of love and a lot of drive and brought this beautiful instrument to life. Mr. Tommy Hatcher.
Honored to be here, Western Dirt.
Oh my God, you've been calling me that for years.
Sorry, I had to throw it in.
Here it is. This is the guitar that became nicknamed Christine. There she is. Now tell me that is not a stunning finish. And being as that this was technically Tom's second burst attempt, I think he got it right. I think he nailed it.
I think you got it.
I mean, obviously, pretty close to what you were looking for. Yeah, Tom, can you make one of these? Can you make it like that?
Let's get that
so this
going.
is the Tom Wheeler American Guitars book, and Tommy's going to tell you the story of this guitar. Settle in. It's a hell of a story. And I want to hand it over to Tommy while he tells it. Tommy, how did this beautiful instrument come to life?
Well, the story goes, I was working at a little shop in Nashville called Bellevue Guitars. And Charlie Darrington, who was one of the foremost luthiers for Gibson for many years, was working at that store. It was his store, co-owned. And one of the gentlemen that worked there worked at Gibson on the side. And he found the body, which was actually a second. It was going to be cut up and thrown in the dumpster.
All right.
And the reason for that is, right in between the knobs right here, the flame kind of like died out. There was a little bit of a blanch there and the flame didn't cross over. So according to their specs at the time, they said, we're not going to build it. So
this would have been late 80s.
Yeah, late 80s, about 89 or so. So he will go unnamed. He at the time grabbed the body and shoved it underneath the dumpster back there. And he brought it to the shop. I saw it and I literally dropped I freaked out. So I said, look, what do we got to do so that I can get this guitar built? I'd like to have that guitar. So I traded him a beat up 57 Strat that was and he got me the neck and all the parts and everything. Charlie and I built the guitar, and Charlie, being that he was a top-level luthier, understood that what I was going for was to try to get as close to a 59 standard as possible. Because at that time, I was a poor musician. I had no money. I couldn't afford thousands of dollars in an original. So we were trying to get it as close to an original as possible with what we had to work with. So long story short, I took the body home, and it had that original, real thick, plasticky, real red finish, kind of a tomato soup red color.
Yeah.
Thick plastic, coating. And it was way humped up here. Way too much wood in this area. Not anything like an old guitar. No dish, no nothing. So I took it home, scraped off all the original finish, and then I hand sanded this top all the way around. All of this and all of the shaving down of the belly of the guitar I did by hand. No orbital sanders, no block sanders, no nothing. This was all hand sanded with sandpaper. It took probably about 9 or 10 months of this, just working on it. And then I would go and speak to friends who were in the know and say, hey, am I close? Am I looking pretty good?
Kind of the genesis of this guitar, there was kind of an old boys network at Gibson at that
Correct.
point. You were all playing together. You knew each other. You worked with Charlie Darrington over at the shop from time to time. So it was like a Gibson old boys network.
Yeah, and I knew the luthiers in town. Joe Glazer was a friend, and other people that I knew, and I would go and work with these people from time to time, and I would show them the guitar and say, how's it going? How's it look? So Charlie helped me with the neck angle. He got the neck angle actually like a 50s guitar, so it was really flat to the body. So you notice the little tune-o-matic is like literally right off the top of the guitar. Very, very flat string line, going from back to the tailpiece. So that was really huge. We got that right. So then it was a choice of necks. I either had a regular old standard classic neck with the big blocky head stock of the time, or I had this was what they called a 60 classic neck. Yeah. Which was the current closest to the original guitars they had. Yeah. It wasn't even close. But the neck was thin, and I liked the thin profile, and I liked the headstock profile because it was more closer and akin to a 50s guitar.
50s guitar, yeah.
So we went with that. And Charlie epoxied the neck in the body. We didn't have hide glue like the 50s, so we used epoxy. So that neck is never coming off.
It's never going to come
ever.
off. Yeah.
And
this is Charlie Darrington.
The late Charlie Darrington, bless his heart. Yeah. He worked for Gibson all up into the 90s, into the 2000s, and then he passed away. So then
now you have to qualify with the fact that this is pre-Heritage. At Gibson this time, there was nothing being done to recreate the 50s.
The last close approximation of guitars was the Heritage issue series back in the 80s. You remember those? Mm-hmm. And they were, and then they were just coming out with what we call the classic 60 guitar, which was that thin neck top. But they weren't doing anything with flame tops. They weren't doing anything with the particular carb, and all the specs were not quite right yet. Yeah. They weren't there. So Tom Murphy and I were friends. We had known each other for a long time prior to any of this guitar business. Yeah. And
you guys had actually done gigs together.
We had played, and he came to see my band. I saw him, and, blah, blah, blah. And long story short, I went to him and I said, hey, I've got this project I'm doing with Charlie. I said, could you help me with the finish work? Because I need a finish job.
And at this time, Tommy was in the repair shop. Yeah. Tommy was just doing repairs, and if he was shooting anything, he was just shooting repairs. He hadn't actually painted any guitars yet.
He had done one other paint job, he said, prior to this one.
Yeah,
like this.
Yeah, when you were building this, he hadn't, and then he did that one about 2 or 3 weeks before, and that was a buddy of his. And according to Tom, that guitar, through that guy, disappeared into the ether, and it is...
We don't know where it is. And I don't even know what the color was, but... Yeah. I will say it was kind of funny because when we painted this guitar and hung it in the booth, we did the yellow coat first all over the guitar, and then we did his idea of the finish around the edge, which was just basically orange.
Show the video camera and our people out there what you were looking for. This is the actual guitar. It's American Guitars, Tom Wheeler's a book on American guitars, and he loved that guitar, so that's what he was trying to get Tom to emulate at the time.
Right.
And at this time, talking to Tom, he said he'd had an idea. He didn't like the way a lot of the guitars were being painted at the time, and he'd had ideas in his head on how to recreate that 50s burst thing. Hadn't done it yet, hadn't executed it yet, but he had those ideas. In walks Tommy Hatcher with this.
Yeah, and I said, I want that color. I want that dark red, almost sort of like an oxblood red kind of into the edge. And we nailed it. He put a little cherry around on top of the orange, and it was absolutely dead on. And I was like, I couldn't have been happier. So then we put we put nitro on it with no plasticizer. None, zero, because I wanted it to be as vintagey sounding as possible.
Yeah.
So we both agreed, no plasticizer, zero.
Yeah.
And that's when we got right out of the chute. Maybe a few weeks later, it did all of the porcelain cracking.
Yeah.
So this is technically not the cracking I was going for, but it was cracking. So that meant basically the finish was soaking into the wood. And you'll notice that the flame is really, really hot in, the deep sections. That's not double stained.
Yeah.
That's just paint.
It's just paint.
That's just paint soaking into the wood, and over the years has gotten prettier and darker and more, picturesque.
You can't see it in the video, and I don't know how to really do a great close-up of it, but when he describes porcelain cracking, if you can imagine a porcelain teacup aged and cracking, that is the type of aging and cracking that you see in the finish. And when I first saw the guitar, it's one of the things I went, took my breath away, and the other thing was the touch and the feel of the guitar without that plasticine on it. And on the back of this neck, which,
flip
I
it around and show them how pretty that piece of mahogany was. It's
gorgeous, just a gorgeous,
big burl piece of mahogany.
Big, sweeps in this mahogany, and
weighs about 9 point something pounds. I don't know exactly, but it's in that range.
It's in that range,
and it just turned out really, really beautifully. It looked vintage. It looked right.
And all of these, the neck and everything, that's all off the second pile. It just, these were things that weren't going to make it. And, back then the old boy network were like, yeah, we're just going to throw it away. So here,
Yeah, it was really, I couldn't believe it. And when I saw the body, the first thing I thought of was Hotlanta, Dwayne's guitar, because it had the big gull wing chevron flame like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's the ultimate. That's what we all want,
and you got the idea of doing something like this from the guy that made Slash's guitar.
Yeah, Chris Derrick and I were friends out of Atlanta. He worked in a shop up there called Atlanta Guitar Works. They were right next door to a little music shop there, Atlanta Discount Music. And I was just a kid looking to get into a really nice Les Paul, and he was making his clone guitars at that time. They weren't quite there yet. They were getting there, and he was learning and developing his craft. And I ended up with one of his guitars, which was a great guitar because he sourced the right woods, the right Honduran mahogany, the right Eastern maple, the right Brazilian, and those are the real key factors, to make the guitar sound the way it does. But he went on to California, did the Appetite for Destruction guitar. And Jim Foote and him got involved in all of that, and he passed away too early. But he made some beautiful guitars as well. But he got me into the bug. We traded PAFs back and forth. He would get PAFs and parts for his guitars, and he'd say, here, take this one. It's not my favorite. So I would get the cast-offs, the ones that were like, they're all right, But I got some nice. They were good. So that's where that's.
Now, so Tommy, and Tommy just had this great saying. He said, I painted that guitar before I was Tom Murphy.
Exactly.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, I didn't do anything but the Heritage Series. It was years after that for the Heritage Series.
Yeah, because
it was about 1990.
Tom had just gone to the powers that be at Gibson at that time to try to talk them into the idea of going out on the floor and adjusting all of the machinery to make the guitar like they made them back in the day, like the spacing on the peg head holes and the positioning and all of that stuff.
And then here it is.
But this was the start of that. This was the first.
beginning.
This was the first one. And this was before any of that got going, and when they signed off on it. So this was sort of like a first shot.
This was
off the bat.
This was the prototype, and to prove it could be done. And man, oh man, was it done?
It did really, really well. And of course, through the years, as I've come back to visit this guitar again, it's gotten better with age.
Yeah.
They get better with like fine wine. The finish dries up, it cures into the body, the glue all dries out. And our dear friend Russell Farrow, who ended up with this guitar in a trade for some old Marshalls, he put real PAFs in it. So it has real PAFs in it now, and it sounds phenomenal. It sounds just like a really old guitar.
It is stunning. And I haven't really told the story of how this guitar in my life. Do you feel like sitting with me and let's doing it?
Go for it. I know it's a tough one.
Yeah. All right, I'm back. I'm not going to lose my shit. I promise.
It's all good.
Yeah. You know, this guitar has a deeper meaning. Now, it launched an amazing career. It launched Tom Murphy's career. As he said, I painted that guitar before I was Tom Murphy, was the quote he hit me with, and it blew me away, blew my mind. But the history of this guitar is a different thing. I didn't know all these things back then. You know, Tommy knew those things. Tom Murphy wasn't Tom Murphy yet. He was just your bro, Tom Murphy, working at the Gibson factory in the Old Boys Network. Charlie Derringer was just the bro you worked with. You know, these guys went on to be legends, but at the time,
we were all working stiffs, you know?
yeah, everyone's just trying to make a living.
Trying to make it.
So I'd known a guy named Russell Farrow for many years, and at this point, I just finished up in a band called Auto Drive. It was 1990. It was New Year's of '91. We had put a little band together. Russell calls me, says, I got a gig. Can you do it? Let's call the band the Flaming Shoes. My buddy Tommy Hatcher is going to come in and play with us.
Forgot the name.
Yeah. And it was, you know, Mark Prater on drums. God bless him. Everyone that watches these videos knows who Mark Prater is. Mark Prater on drums, Dave Winter on bass, Tommy Hatcher on guitar, Russell Farrow on guitar, me on guitar. So we had a 3-guitar army on New Year's Eve at a party with about 20 rich people in it. And that was it.
Yeah.
Tommy comes walking in with this. I'd never seen it, heard about it, did not know it existed. It was like someone walked in with my dream guitar. I was like, what in the hell is that? And he goes, this is my guitar. And, you know, you hadn't named it Christine at that point.
I had named it. I named it pretty much right off the bat.
Oh, so it was named
It was
Christine.
named Christine
right
long ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
New history. Did not know.
The movie Christine, watch it. It's cool.
All right. So this was Christine then, and I have pictures of that party, and it's a blast, and we loved it. We did the gig. Tommy disappears into the ether. I think you might have moved back to Nashville.
Yeah, I was back in Nashville.
Back in Nashville. And we go on. I'm struggling, trying to get a record deal. I finally get a record deal. I get an advance. I'm going to use all the advance on the recording. I've only got 2 guitars at the time. I've got my little PRS black guitar, and I've got a little red Strat. And I've only got 1 amp. It was a Seymour Duncan convertible, and it just ripped and sounded like Marshall. But I needed some variety for the record, so I went to Russell. I said, Russell, could you bring some things down to the studio for me? Because he was a collector, and he was, at that point, he was just entering into being Thoroughbred Music's vintage guitar buyer. Now, I didn't know that him and Tommy had connected. Tommy was moving on to Strats, and Russell had worked out a deal with you. I think it was for a Strat and some Marshalls or something.
It was for that red 56 Strat and a 100-watt half stack.
There you go. Right. For Christine. So, and that Russell had acquired Christine. Russell comes walking into the studio on a tracking day and says, okay, man, I brought you a Les Paul. And he opens this up and I'm like, it's the Les Paul. And he goes, yeah, Christine. I'm like, Jesus. And I was so thrilled. I was like, Russell, you have to play on this record. I don't know what you're going to play, but we picked a song, found some chords. I said, you're just going to play some massive chords with Christine through one of your Marshalls that you brought in. It's going to be awesome. And I have a picture of him in the control room from that session playing Christine, and it hangs on my wall downstairs. And I was going to put it in the video, but I couldn't get it off the wall. Anyway, I will put it in the video somehow. So, at the end of the session, he's like, yeah, well, go ahead and finish up. You got a few more weeks on the session, and I'll come back and grab Christine someday. Well, at the time, I'm a single dad. I'm starving. I'm trying to do things. And he just left this with me for a year. And I played it. And I was gigging with it. And he just left it with me. And then one day I said, look, you got to take this back. I can't hold on to this forever.
Yeah, a little scary.
And right around that time, this would have been 93, 94, was when Tom Murphy was making his move with the Heritage Series at Gibson. Was it the Heritage Series? Historic.
Yeah.
The Historic Series. The Heritage was the 80s. Historic was Tom's big thing in the 90s. And then if you want to find out more of Tom's history after that, but it was at that point that Tom Murphy became Tom Murphy. And God bless him, one of the most beautiful careers in music history. And what a gentleman. So this guitar, Russell had about 100 guitars at that point. So he moved on to the next thing, stuck it in a case.
Parked it.
And parked it in his pile of wood, as he called it.
Lumber.
His lumber pile. And I had always, it stuck with me. And so I had aligned with Paul Reed Smith and the Paul Reed Smith Company when I started playing with Porcupine Tree. And probably about 5 years after I started playing with the tree, Win Crozak came to me and said, John, we'd like to build you a guitar. And I got him to build my main guitar. And when I spec'd it out, I had them, they were doing single cuts at the time. I asked them to make the single cut a little thicker. And I asked them to give it that 60s neck feel and not put the plastic or the
Plasticizer.
Plasticizer
Right.
or whatever. I'm not sure what they do. They do a polyurethane.
It's a nitrocellulose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked them to make it a satin finish. And so it would feel like this guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. And to this day, that's my main guitar that I play on every gig, everywhere I go. And I've had that guitar almost 20 years. So thank you to Win Crozak for that. And the amazing people at PRS, because you fulfilled my dream. I could never have Christine, but I had the guitar that fulfilled my dream. So go on. And, Russell at that point had gotten out of the music business, probably, well, I don't know, Thoroughbred Music closed down. He got a kayak shop going, and he became a world-class kayaker. I mean, kayaked all over the world, a top-tier trainer. And we stayed in touch. And then a couple of years ago, he reached out, and we did a deal for a little 57 Tweed. And typical to Russell, let's just say that, he was like, it was more likely here. And I handed him something, and he's like, don't ever sell it. I'm like, I won't ever sell it. And I had this Tweed. And then a couple of years later, he called me and said, could I borrow one of your guitar trolleys? I'm sick of carrying gig bags. And I said, well, not only can you borrow that guitar trolley, just take it. It's yours. Mm-hmm. And he came over and picked it up on a Friday. And then the next Saturday, he passed away a week after that. Suddenly, unexpectedly, and it devastated all of us.
Yeah, it did. I drove all the way down from Nashville to just sit by his side, even though he was not with us anymore. Yeah. I just had to tell him, goodbye and move it away, privately. So.
And then Mark and I went and did the same thing.
Yeah.
It was tough. Really tough. And then he passed, and his brothers came down, and his brothers were, they were in a jam because Russell had a serious estate at that point. He had about 136, 137 guitars, had 85 amps and cabs, all of it just, in his lumber pile, and stashed away.
And cherry stuff.
He had some amazing
nice
stuff.
Yeah.
And so you and me were with his brothers, and we were talking, and they didn't know what to do. And that's when I suggested, let's get a hold of Kent Sonnenberg and over at Replay. And I made the connection between them and Kent.
Yep.
And then Kent and Replay Music was able to buy Russell's estate. And it was at that point one of the brothers said, look, when this goes down, I want a few of his friends to be able to get something at whatever cost that we're paid for.
They offered us, the little inner circle, the rights to have first dibs on the instruments that were special to us or unique to us. Yeah. This being one, and then the 56 Strat that I had traded him. All of that came to us, and they offered us first dibs at a very nominal price. Fair price.
And so, of course, I said there was this guitar, and I haven't seen it in 20 plus years, but I know he has it. And it was in that pile, and Kent said, oh, yeah, that's Christine. And
everybody knew him.
Everybody knew Christine. I'd forgotten the name, and I hadn't seen it so many years. And about a month later, Kent calls me, and he's like, we found her. Why don't you come down and get her? So.
Well, remember, you called me.
Yeah.
And you actually politely called and asked me, said, Tommy, is it okay if I make a bid on this guitar? I mean, because, it's your guitar. Do you want it back? And I said, hey, go for it. I'd love for you to have it. That would be an honor, for it to go to a great player and be out in the world and making great music. I said, have at it,
That's right. I forgot I called you first.
Yeah. But that was so classy. But that was very classy of you, and I really appreciated it because that's how much Russell in this whole little circle of life meant to us,
Yeah, I mean, you've heard about Russell in other videos of mine, and you will hear about him again because he's that much of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I go to the shop. Kent opens the case up, and of course, Christine is even more beautiful than I remembered.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up, and the price was a little more than I thought it was going to be. But I called my wife, and she said, "Oh, it's Russell. You're having that guitar." So we just said, "We're doing this." And I asked Ken. I said, "Ken, it's a little pricier than I thought." And he goes, "Well, man, it's a Murphy." And I'm like, "A Murphy," and I was emotional at the time. I didn't put together. I'm like, "Okay, whatever you say. Give me the guitar," and I left. And I brought the guitar home, and I started playing it, and
It's all good.
All right, I'm back. So, time goes on. I'm touring with Vertical Horizon, and I'm like, well, Russell would want me to play that guitar. I want to play his guitar. I'm going to play his guitar. So, I'm touring all over the country, flying it in guitar cases to gigs. And I'm playing it on gigs, and I'm having a good old time. Sending him pictures on Facebook.
Yeah, send me a picture. I want to see it. I want to see it in action.
And then we go to play Disney, where we were flying back from Canada, and Air Canada lost it for 4 days. They lost this and my main guitar. I had my main guitar, which was the clone of this, and Christine in the same case, and Air Canada can't find it. Well, luckily, I had the air tag on it, and I was telling them, I see the guitar, I know where it is, find those guitars. And they did. So, time goes on, I get a message on Instagram from a guy that works at Gibson. He's, "Man, I love your YouTube channel, love your Instagram. I used to watch you Porcupine Tree. If you're ever in Nashville, come by the shop. I'd love to give you a tour of the shop." I said, "Fantastic." So I reached out to him. I said, "Oh, by the way, do you know who Tom Murphy is?" And he goes, "Yeah, I know who Tom Murphy is." I said, "Okay, cool, because I think I've got a guitar that he painted." So I sent a picture, and I emailed it to him. And he's like, "Okay, I'll send it to him." I didn't think anything of it, I thought maybe he'll remember, maybe he won't. And the next day, I get a message. Said, "Yeah, Tom knows that guitar. He remembers that guitar, and he wants to talk to you." And that's when I was like, okay. Tom called, and we had an hour discussion about Russell, about you, about the guitar, about how this opened the door to what became, again, one of the most beautiful careers, legendary
Still
careers.
going.
Still
Going
going.
strong.
He's still there, still doing it. And then we were able to have a couple more conversations. And he explained to me the history of this guitar. And then I went back to Tommy and got more details about it. And here we are today with my dear friend Tommy. Thank you for
It's my honor.
coming by. And telling us the history of how this beautiful, beautiful instrument came together. And even more than that, how, the friendship. And, I was broke. I didn't have shit. And Russell just said, "Here,
Yeah.
take this,
What
play this."
What an instrument
You know.
to play.
Just take, one of my most prized possessions
Yeah.
and keep it. Put it on your record and play it. That is brotherhood.
Yeah, it is. And what an inspiration to push you to a higher high and, reach for the stars. Because these kind of instruments really are iconic and they are special.
Yeah.
And
Now, you got to tell the story of your serial number.
We forgot about that.
Because it's got a Gibson serial number.
So back in the day when young Murphy and I went in the after hours to do the paint job, part of the whole process was this was an official Gibson, paint job. You did it in the paint booth at Gibson.
All Gibson parts.
All Gibson parts. So Murphy even gave me the pickup ring for the back because I needed a tall ring and I couldn't find one. So he gave me that. So we painted the guitar, and then Tom was going to clean the binding like they do with the razor blade, clean all the binding. And he said, "Well, what do you want to do with the serial number?" And I said, "Well, my birthday will work. How about that?" So born in 61, 1/11/61. Will that work? Sure. So that's what it is, 1/11/61. And it is official. It's in the Gibson serial number book. And it's an official real deal. Now, granted, that was a long time ago, and that
It was a different era,
that
different old boy
regime is-
network.
yeah,
That
it's
regime's
gone.
gone.
And there's a whole new crew in there now. But the fact remains, this is an official, Gibson paint job. Murphy did it. He did all the work spraying it. I watched. And so it is really literally the first real deal historic burst that, there was ever done. So it is really cool to see it now because it has really aged beautifully. The color has stayed true to the original intent of what we were going for. The cracking looks wonderful, and you can really see how deep the finish goes into the wood by the crack right down the center.
Gorgeous.
You know, it's like playing a real piece of wood, you know, not plastic.
Yeah.
So yes, the sound is there, and I'm so tickled to death. You own it, and you get to go out and make really great music with it. You know what I mean?
And hopefully the airlines won't lose it again.
No,
actually, my wife has said, you know, come on now, you got other things to take out. So anyway, this is the story of Christine. It is not just a story about a guitar. It is a story about friends. Your friendship with Charlie.
Blood, sweat, and tears, Sandy.
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears, Sandy. Your friendship with Tom Murphy.
Yeah.
Our mutual friendship with Russell Farrow.
Yeah.
And
to those that are not with us anymore, it's a real tribute to them. Both Charlie and Russell were dear friends, and we owe them that, you know, a tip of the hat.
Yeah. And the type of person that Russell was, to take that guitar and go, here, man, you need this. And let me use it and play it. So anyway, the Journeyman Guitarist signing out. I hope you enjoyed that story, you know. And
it's been an honor, my
Tommy
friend.
Hatcher.
It's been an honor honoring our friend, because he was a dear friend.
Tommy Hatcher, Christine, John Wesley, the Journeyman Guitarist, signing out.